Great to have everyone with us here. And we are also joined by a bit more than 60 participants, I believe, online. And this event is also being streamlined live via YouTube. And so just to maximize the outreach also. It's a real pleasure to have everyone here, excellencies who have been joining us. Your Excellency, Mr. Eduardo de Vega, Undersecretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, thank you for joining us today. Excellency, Mr. Peter Mohan Maisri Pierres, Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka to the UN and also President of the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. Thank you for joining us. And Excellency, Mr. Antonio Lagdameo, thank you also for joining us, Ambassador of the Philippines. We're very thrilled to have this very important discussion today about the integration of South-South and Triangle cooperation and voluntary national reviews to support the acceleration of SDGs. So in addition to the key speakers today, we do also have some eminent speakers with us, and we will introduce them. We have DESA with us today, represented by Mr. Bear with me, Mr. Edward. Mr. Mr. Neil Pierre, Acting Director for Office of the Intergovernmental Support and Coordination for Sustainable Development at UNDESA. We're also joined by Mr. Edward Walugambe, the Commission of Strategic Coordination and Implementation of the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda, and Mr. Oliver Paddison, the Chief for the Country with Special Needs Section at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Thank you all for being with us today on this important event. So before I move forward with our agenda, let me pass it to His Excellency, Mr. Eduardo, for his introduction.
Yes, good afternoon to all. Perhaps there's good afternoon. So first, I'd like to thank our host for this meeting, yourself, Madam of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and Ambassador Antonio Lagdameo joins me in thanking as well Ambassador Omar Elal of Morocco, who is the other co-chair of the Group of Friends of Voluntary National Reviews. And of course, thank you, Ambassador Pierce as well, a good friend of the Philippines, Pierce, for being here with us. So together, the Philippines and Morocco as co-chairs have, as requested by the ECOSOC President and the President of the General Assembly, assisted the 39 VNR presenters this year, principally by ensuring engagement and experience sharing during all the VNR presentations. The group of friends of VNRs was also engaged and submitted inputs to the handbook that we are launching this afternoon. As the co-chair stated in the foreword of the handbook, and I quote, South-South and triangular cooperation are a valuable catalyst in galvanizing political will and in enhancing know-how to implement the much-needed economic and social reforms needed to rescue the SDGs. Now, the integration of South and triangular cooperation perspectives in the VNRs is important as it helps in tracking more comprehensively and inclusively the progress of implementation of the 2030 Agenda. It also helps generate valuable evidence of South-South and triangular cooperation towards achieving the SDGs. Now, in my national capacity, I wish to share that the Philippines is both a provider and a beneficiary of South-South cooperation programs. The country has provided considerable assistance to other SSC developing countries, typically on capacity building and sharing of expertise on a range of development themes, from agricultural and rural development to ICT, microfinance, education, health, and welfare, among others. The Philippines has cooperated mostly at a regional Asia-Pacific level and has engaged in South-South and triangular programs with African countries. The Philippines supported research and development on the new rice for Africa or Nerica varieties by crossing African rice species, which are resistant to disease and drought, and Asian rice species, which are high yield potential. The country also partnered with Japan on providing support for education in Kenya. In addition, the Philippines is also a beneficiary of triangular cooperation in agricultural from Indonesia and Japan. It also partnered with Japan to provide support for agriculture and rural development to Cambodia and Vietnam through public-private partnerships. And China, South Korea, and India are also observed to be the emerging key donors to the Philippines. In line with our commitment to the 2030 agenda, the Philippines we have already presented our VNR 3 times, 2016, 2019, and 2022, incorporating SSTC partnerships. I would like to add, in my capacity as Undersecretary for Migration Affairs in the Foreign Ministry of the Philippines, that what is overlooked is the fact that a lot of migration is south-south. It's not all south to north. And the valuable contributions from our migrants to each other's countries in bringing back to their country expertise and knowledge from which they gain from other countries, it cannot be overmeasured, cannot be overestimated. It's quite part of the development of the world, of globalization, of achieving the 2030 agenda, sustainable development. So to conclude, I would like to convey in my national capacity, on behalf of the co-chairs of the group of friends of VNRs, our congratulations to VNOSSC for this important handbook and our felicitación, and our advanced congratulations as well to the VNR presenters this year, including this afternoon. The Philippines will always be your partner in advancement of SDG implementation all levels. Salamat po, muchas gracias. Shukran. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for providing us with your insights and the highlights. And I like very much underpinning the importance of the diaspora.
Yes.
In this overall equation of, supporting countries and fulfilling the SDGs and advancing development. Thank you very much. So let me pass it to His Excellency, Mr. Peter Mohan Maitri Pieres, the permanent representative of Sri Lanka, and also our president of the 21st session of the High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation, for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Director Dima Al-Khatib, for inviting me to this conference. I commend the co-chairs of the group of friends of the voluntary national reviews, that the permanent mission of the Kingdom of Morocco to the United Nations, and the permanent mission of the Philippines, particularly to you, Ambassador Legdemeo, and to Ambassador Hilale, who have been close friends of ours, as well as the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, organizing this event today on the sidelines of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. Of course, I also do thank the high officials seated on the right of us for being present with us, and we have been looking forward to hearing your inputs. Distinguished delegates, the alignment of the SGDs and the global commitments with national policies is recognized, perhaps, as I won't be wrong to say, Director, as a core requirement in the SDGs implementation discourse. In this whole discussion of ours, I don't think you can separate one from the other. So, however, it remains, however, a challenge, I say, to incorporate the 2030 agenda into national, subnational, and local plans and policies. As we all know, we've been in government long enough to know we can't probably manage our own policies. Incorporating the SDGs in our policies is yet presents another challenge of a peculiar kind. So a review of the VNRs suggests that all of the countries in Asia have basically a line development plan with the global agenda. Of course, we do take cognizance of what's going on right around the world, right? Therefore, the alignment framework has to be taken into account, if I'm right. The capacities and levels of development of different countries and in their contextual realities. Let's be completely honest about that. In fact, I've gone to the extent of saying that we cannot actually set a benchmark for the whole world in achieving the SDGs. And perhaps we won't be too disappointed if we didn't actually achieve those benchmarks, if we fix the benchmarks having regard to our national competencies. In other words, what's necessarily good for the United States won't be probably good for Sri Lanka. We probably are not we are not similarly circumstanced, if I was to put it that way. So existing policy actions towards attaining the SDGs need to be integrated into medium, long-term frameworks to ensure policy continuity. So I really don't believe that although we are fretting about the fact that we won't get there in time, I still am optimistic that we can, if we tweak this whole approach away from this very traditional way in which we have been approaching it for the last, how many years? 8 years. Right. So in the outcome document, so that's something that I would probably leave you to think about. I've canvassed this with many people. I don't, of course, find much favor because they don't kind of probably take the trouble to think about it. But if you really think about it, in other words, I always say it's like running a race between two clear, distinct countries, one starch eating and the other protein eating. It's like that. There's a big difference. The classification is pretty clear. So what's the upshot of this? So in the outcome document of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, or BAPA +40, member states recognized the importance of South and Triangular cooperation in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as perhaps being a trusted mechanism for leveraging each other's experience in underlying what works, identifying persistent impediments that are staring in the face, making evidence-based responses, including facilitating exchange of resources and knowledge that addresses needs only countries of similar development pathways, I say, enjoy, and they are close partners who can understand the environment in which we are trying to implement this process. So that is another thought that I would probably leave you with to ponder over. Now, as president of the 21st session of the high-level Committee on South-South Cooperation, which Dima continues to bless me with all the time and reminds me about, I feel rather embarrassed at the fact because I know so little of South-South Cooperation. I'm learning fast, of course. And I'm compelled to because she keeps on insisting that I am the president of the high-level Committee on South-South Cooperation, right? I'm happy to witness the launch today, of course, of the handbooks to support integrating South-South and Triangular cooperation in the voluntary national reviews. So in a practical response to members' states' demand, and that it was what it is, expressed in our 2020 HLPF ministerial declaration, having regard to that, and notably in our resolution A/RES/77/185, we have encouraged the United Nations entities to support developing countries in integrating development cooperation perspectives, including in particular South-South cooperation into the preparation and presentation of our VNRs on sustainable development. So to conclude all this, at the core of our VNR mechanism, we see is what we need to appreciate is the core of partnerships and collaborations, without which we probably will get nowhere. We know, and we need to appreciate the fact that no single entity can to take forward all the goals and targets on their own. No man is an island, so to speak, in this particular game. This handbook, which I've had the pleasure of perusing, right, will be of assistance in the review and reporting process for inclusive decision and making priority settings. Now, making it therefore possible for all stakeholders and partners to work together in a systematic way on the same priorities. So, my dear friends, we have undergone these challenges and gained these insights from our own experiences, for example, in Sri Lanka, in our first VNR in 2018, just before the COVID-19 pandemic, and in our second in 2022 last year, as we addressed the multi-dimensional impact of the pandemic. From our own experience, we have come to rethink the VNR process itself. We have learned a lot in that process, more as a collective effort to understand challenges and co-design, I say, strategies and policies, and as a new way for working towards together with stakeholders such as yourselves who are here. So we are looking forward to that partnership. Integrating South-South cooperation, therefore, in the VNRs, in my considered and I'm convinced of the fact, can facilitate the sharing of experiences, the best practices that we all have, the lessons that we have learned, the mobilization of multi-stakeholder support and partnerships with a view to accelerate development impacts. Now, as this handbook aims to support the member states in advancing the integration of South-South and triangular cooperation, with the VNR providing step-by-step guidance with good practices examples, we believe that with the implementation of this handbook, that more VNRs that will be presented to the HLPF in the coming years with the aid of this, there won't be we would certainly encourage them in the coming years, integrate, it will bring closer together South-South and triangular cooperation perspectives during their preparation and presentation. As we have heard in many discussions this week here in New York, in the UN, and we will hear in the coming weeks, in the last whole week of the HLPF, member states, particularly the Global South, are making tremendous effort to galvanize action to meet the 2030 agenda and overcome the setbacks, I say, caused by the global pandemic and the deteriorating international security environment. So within a short time left for achieving the SDGs, I don't believe it is that short. I would still like to be, as I said, optimistic. We need to redouble, in my view, our efforts to accelerate the process, starting with more coordinated, better informed, and more strategic responses within and between our countries. Support towards this effort goes out through South-South partnerships and the UN initiative, such as the launch of this handbook, is, in my view, invaluable and reminds us that we are working as a collective. That perhaps is a manifestation of that. In conclusion, I commend all those who had a hand in the development, in the putting together of this handbook, and the office of, and your office for effectively carrying out its mandate, and all who responded to the call by member states and by the Secretary General to pursue a transformational shift, if I was to call it, to revitalize the SDGs and build the world ambition in the 2030 agenda. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellency, thank you very much for this powerful statement. highlighting a lot of those core messages that I wanted to highlight. So you saved me the time. But it also speaks a lot from your country experience and the impact and the relevance of having such a handbook that will be, not only in terms of tracking the progress, as His Excellency was saying, but also a way of trying to harmonize the way we look at South-South cooperation and to make sure that it becomes part and parcel of our development ecosystem at the national level, but also in terms of the global thinking. So let me just say a few words, not to repeat what my eminent speakers have been saying. It's just I want to recap a little bit yesterday's, a few days ago actually, the UN Secretary General's report on the SDGs, right? The special edition, whereby he noted that the SDGs are really in deep trouble in terms of advancing, and that a preliminary assessment of the roughly 140 targets with data show only about 15% are on track. So this is quite an alarming number, and that 48% are moderately or severely off track, while 37% are in stagnation or regression mode. So this by itself, the data speaks for itself in terms of the pressing need and the timeliness of really launching this handbook to guide, the countries, but also the UN country teams that shoulders the effort of the countries in moving forward towards, tracking and supporting the advancement of the SDGs. We all know and recognize also, as it was, stated in the different resolutions, but also the BAPA plus 40 outcome document, the importance of South-South cooperation and triangle cooperation, and the importance of leveraging that for the advancement of Agenda 2030, in order to achieve the different SDGs in the different countries of the South. So it goes without saying that, the importance of this handbook in terms of trying to achieve that, and in terms of operationalizing the recommendations of the different resolutions, the different documents, the different callings also in terms of advancing the SDGs. What I would like to also mention is that I want to give an example, right? An impactful example whereby, for example, Georgia and in Uzbekistan, they have carried out kind of a successful twinning program in 2019. And through 2 study tours to both countries, the country representatives explored each other's institutional structures and reform agendas. And since the government, of Georgia was conducting this review for its second time, it was able to share with Uzbekistan its experience of utilizing the voluntary national review to advance social policy reforms. And by including also civil society, media, and other oversight institutions such as parliament and the review and the twinning process, Georgia was able to highlight to Uzbekistan these stakeholders' important role in the monitoring of the goals. So that shows also how the collaboration through sharing the experience of these VNRs development have been also extremely useful. Mm-hmm. Similarly, Denmark commenced a peer review collaboration on VNR with Norway and Kenya in 2021, which also involved exchanging of experiences and reviewing the draft VNRs. And this is something that we would like to encourage, and we would like to see more of it happening. With the handbook, our office is also responding to the high-level political forum on sustainable development ministerial declaration, right? And the latest UNGA resolution in different ways. First, in collaboration with the co-chairs of the groups of the Friends of VNR, and I want to thank Philippines and Morocco for being the real advocates and for pushing things forward. We have been able to jointly prepare with them the handbook, which provides a step-by-step guidance, drawing from good practices and examples on integrating South-South and triangular cooperation into the preparation and the presentations of the VNR. Secondly, working together with the co-chairs of the group of the Friends of the VNR, we are also committed to support developing countries in integrating South-South and triangle cooperation into doing the same, right? As we move with the other undertakings that we have. A few days ago, we talked about how we will be integrating also with the UN country team South-South into the UN Development Cooperation Framework. So hopefully that could also be an additional support in terms of moving these things forward. And thirdly, and very importantly, this complements the existing UNDESA VNR handbooks and other resource packages. And we're very happy also to have DESA with us today, and we will hear more from them as we move. So as we move forward, because we want to give kind of a short presentation to give you a flavor of what the VNR handbook is all about. I want us, everybody is sitting on a chair that has one of those handbooks. And for the sake of, officially launching, can we just raise it and just say, that's our official launch today of the VNR. That would be captured by, thank you very much. And I'm going to invite my colleague Bushan to give a very short presentation on what does it include, so it gives you a flavor of that, and then we will hear also from our eminent speakers. All off.
Thank you, Dima. Distinguished delegates and UN colleagues, I'll take through the key elements of the handbook very briefly. Next slide. In my presentation, we'll be covering these 4 areas: process and timeline of the handbook development and rollout, expected results from the use of handbook, ways of integrating South-South and triangular cooperation in the VNRs, and key elements, key entry points of integrating South-South and triangular cooperation in the VNR. Next slide. Yeah. Yes, as we develop the handbook, we go through a very, very rigorous process. And in this process, the co-chairs of the groups of Friends of VNR, UN entities, and the member state were heavily engaged. We started the process in June 2022, developing a roadmap to how we integrate South-South and triangular cooperation in VNR. And following the roadmap, we initiated the development of handbook, and the consultation for the inputs were rigorously conducted with the member state, UN entities, and stakeholders. The consultation process, we reach out all the member state through the co-chairs of the groups of Friends of VNR and the UN entities through the UN interagency mechanism. And the key elements of the handbook, handbook was also presented for the discussion in the 2 regional forums, in Asia Pacific and the Africa, together with the SCAP and the ECA. And the draft comments on the handbook was shared. The handbook was shared with the member states with a joint letter from the co-chairs of the groups of Friends of VNR, and we received, and the UN entities through interagency mechanism and other stakeholders. We received a tremendous number of comments. They are very useful, and many of them, and most of them, which are very valid, and they were incorporated in the handbook. Then the consultations on the key elements of the handbook were also present in the recent group of Friends of VNR meeting in May. And now we are launching the handbook today. Thank you so much, all of you, having here and the online through the YouTube and Zoom link. And moving ahead from here, from July to December, we're planning to integrate the key elements of the handbook in the existing VNRs packages, the integrated approach, and moving from the 2024, we're planning to have a training and advisory support to better integrate the South-South and triangular cooperation in VNR. Next. Yeah, these are the some glimpse of the consultation process and the handbook development process. The left one, the first one, is the meeting with the group of friends of VNR, and the right one is online discussions, and the below one, which is IPFST, and that's when later. Thank you. Next. Yeah, the key expected result of the handbook we expect is that more VNR presented to the HLPF integrated South-South and triangular cooperation perspective. The second one is the more member states receive capacity development support and technical advisory support from UN system to integrate South-South and triangular cooperation in VNR. Another important element that we really need to advance in SDG monitoring is that how the South-South and triangular cooperation, it's contributing the SDG implementation, and how the evidence, right, to what extent the evidence of the contribution could be generated. We expect that this handbook implementation will also contribute in that. And the fourth one, the more member state and development partner consider integrating South-South and triangular cooperation as a modality where appropriate to accelerate progress toward SDG. Next. Yeah. As I mentioned, that the handbook development process went a very rigorous process, and consultation with all regional commissions and all 5 regional commissions. They're very, very supportive, providing inputs, and the UNTTs and member state. And we reviewed all the VNRs that were presented to draw the good practices, and based on the good practices and consultation, the stakeholder, the handbook suggests there are 2 approaches, the 2 ways to integrate South-South and triangular cooperation VNR. The first one is the process approach, means integrating South-South and triangular cooperation in the VNR process. For instance, using a twinning and collaboration. I will go more in detail in the next slide. And another is the content. Next slide, please. While talking about the process approach, means applying South-South and triangular cooperation VNR, there are 4 key elements found successful, and the stakeholder also recommend. And that is the thing this handbook suggests. One is twinning between among the countries to develop the VNR. And the second is the VNR collaboration with a separate country and peer review of the report, and the participating the UN facilitated global and regional workshop. Next slide. When it comes to the integrating the South-South and triangular cooperation in the report itself, based on the consultation and good practices, there are 6 areas which this handbook suggests, is that reporting on SDGs, this SDG 3 targets and indicator, including 17.3.1, which deals with the South-South and triangular cooperation aspect. The first one is the reporting on SDG 17, and now the Statistical Commission and UNTAD and the UN entities and member states are working on the quantifying the South-South cooperation better with the enhanced framework of these monitoring of the 17.3.1. Second thing is the handbook suggested writing a chapter itself into the VNR report where applicable, and many countries like Indonesia and others have already done that. Reporting on the South-South and triangular cooperation project and initiative, and reporting on means of implementation, resource mobilization and financing, and the peer review, and reporting on the peer review. And the more important thing is that follow up on the previous VNRs, especially in the South-South and triangular cooperation. Next. To bring that, the 2 process perspective and the contents perspective in a workflow while preparing the VNR, this handbook suggests there are 7 key entry points. Though the integration of the VNR, integration of the South-South and triangular cooperation VNR start from the SDG planning and national planning, but these 7 steps are mainly focused on the preparation and the presentation of VNR. It's at the kickoff stage, means the very beginning of the preparation of VNR and organization and preparation in engaging South-South and triangular cooperation activities, participatory workshops, and report writing and content up on the SSTC, South-South and triangular cooperation, and presentation on HLPF and the post-VNR. The handbook provides step-by-step guidance with the good practices example. The handbook that we have here provides examples and also the recommendation to how to take these 7 steps as a key entry point and materialize into the action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bushan, for the presentation and presenting to us the elements of the handbook. As we start our discussions, we want to hear from the experience of Uganda, and we do have the pleasure to have with us today Mr. Edward Walugembe, Commissioner on Strategic Coordination and Implementation at the Office of the Prime Minister, who will kindly share with us how did Uganda integrate South-South and Triangle Cooperation and their respective VNR. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, members present and the members online. I want to say thank you very much for this presentation, and also I thank you for the invitation where we come to share, but most importantly to learn, and we take that very seriously. One starting point is that South-South cooperation is very important in delivering us from where we are to the desired objective. And also I want to make a statement that we are all concerned about everybody, because nobody is safe until all of us are safe. The COVID pandemic showed us that we are not very far from one another. So could affect one another regardless of the distance. And the South-South cooperation takes us to that level where we cooperate and develop and achieve together. So I want to emphasize the importance of the South-South cooperation. And also when we talk about the guidelines, which have been properly articulated for us here, I look at 2 things. One, we are looking at the guidelines to drive us to SDG successful implementation. But South-South cooperation will be a vehicle to drive us to development even after the SDGs have been achieved. So we needed to strengthen the cooperation. And when I look at the guidelines, I think we need to, I liked the scorecard. I like a scorecard for achieving SDGs, but also I like to see the scorecard for strengthening South-South cooperation so that we can move from first level to the next level. And I've also liked the processes that have been taken, the rigorous, consultative, really leaving nobody behind to take care of the different and peculiar statements and positions. So in Uganda, we value so much South-South cooperation, and I want to integrate it in the VNR. But before again we do that, I want to see, and I stated it, but to emphasize the fact that we integrate South-South cooperation into not only reviewing, but also in planning and implementation. So those are very strong issues that I want to look at, that we can never review before we plan together and implement together and have a common agenda which we want to achieve. I think we we look at bolstering the capacities of countries within the cooperation framework, and in the interest of leaving no one behind, that twinning would help us to see from our peculiar positions how we can help one another to move. It may go beyond financial and go to non-financial cooperation, but at the same time also, maybe can also look at which country is doing better in which sector, and we twin and come together and move together. We have peculiar issues, but the most important thing is that, just as I said at the beginning, that we are not far off to be affected by humanity. So, getting out of the pandemic, we are close enough to affect one another negatively. Now we use this to affect one another positively. So I want to look at that very, very seriously. And I think we needed to see how best we take forward this agenda. I wanted also to say something regarding these well-articulated guidelines here. How do we domesticate them so that at the end of the day, we can have something comparable? How do we domesticate them? How do we integrate them in our in our individual plans? I had an opportunity much earlier under the East African Community Establishment, and I was in the measurement side where we are looking at how do we integrate and how do you get a reporting arrangement for the East African Community States, the database, common definitions, because like in essence I said, we have national processes, we have national systems, we have national indicators, but how do we move together in cooperation and then say, I think as a block, we are improving here and there. So that is very important. And I so when we come to domestication and integration, I think we need to work together and look at the common definition. The good thing is that we align ourselves to the SDGs, the UN statistical systems, and the rest, which helps us to measure progress in the areas where we are. But I want also to say that we, in our VNRs, I think this is the way to go, and integrating South-South cooperation so that we leave no one behind, and also we are not left behind where there is progress. I don't know whether I still have more time, but I think we need to strengthen this, and when you look at the population potential in our countries, we need again to see how best have other countries utilize their youthful populations to achieve this, and so we take forward whatever is being done. But we recognize the importance of the South-South cooperation as a driver for us to achieve SDGs, but also how do we strengthen South-South cooperation to make sure that it drives us to the promised land even after the SDGs. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walugembe, for your insights. And we too take notes of what you mentioned about the importance of review, the planning and implementation, and also the domestication. This is definitely extremely important. It has to be contextualized, but also um, looking at scorecards for South-South cooperation. My colleague has mentioned that there is already an effort which is co-led by UNCTAD in terms of trying to measure 17.3.1, the indicator on South-South, and all of these elements will have to come together at some point in order to achieve and to get to that end. And in terms of planning and implementation, there is also a parallel effort. We talked about it 2 days back in terms of preparing guidelines to help the country teams at the national level to anchor South-South in the national planning and how to do it from a, a whole of a society approach, I would say, but also with the whole system. So we join you in your thinking and the importance of having this as a drive towards moving things forward. Thank you very much. This brings me to a segue to giving the floor to Mr. Neil Pierre, the Acting Director for the Office of Intergovernmental Support and Coordination for Sustainable Development and UNDESA. And he can shed the light, on enhancing capacities of stakeholders to integrate South-South and triangular cooperation and VNRs, but also how would this complement all the efforts that DESA is doing in chaperoning and accompanying countries in doing so. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Director. Excellencies, I think all protocol observed. So first, let me begin by commending you for convening this side event and also to congratulate you for the launch of this very insightful and useful handbook. Having said that, I want to make a few introductory observations and then come to the point that I've been asked to speak to, which is enhancing capacity of stakeholders. First, I think there are a few things that need restating about the SDGs. Implementation of the SDGs is primarily at the national and local level, first and foremost. This must, however, be bolstered by cooperation and collaboration at the regional level and particularly at the global level. Development cooperation at the global level is very essential to this, and so is South-South and triangular cooperation. The second observation I want to make is that the VNRs are a principal means to track progress nationally, regionally, and globally. We do not have a VNR that is done at the regional level, but we do have the regional forums for sustainable development. They meet, they're very active, and their main findings and recommendations, policy initiatives, are presented to ECOSOC both in the form of a report, and next week we'll have the discussion with representatives of each of the 5 regions. The third point is to say that the review process is first and foremost voluntary in nature. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary, which means each country, as we know, volunteer each year. But it's important to say alongside that is that they are universal in their application, that all of the SDGs as well as the review process itself, notwithstanding the different levels, starting points and levels of development of all the countries to which it applies. A key factor in this is, of course, the fact that the VNRs and the SDG implementation process is government-led with the engagement of all stakeholders. And I recall His Excellency's remarks earlier on that said governments alone cannot do it. All stakeholders have to be engaged and be fully involved in the implementation process, but as well the review process and the process of adapting and changing course as we go along and measuring progress or setbacks. And so in all of this, it is very important that we keep in mind the objectives of the VNRs. First of all, it is to identify progress and gaps where those exist, gaps in implementation. It's also to share experiences, knowledge, and lessons learned, not just at the national level, but regionally and globally. And built into that process of experience and knowledge sharing is, of course, the experience and the benefits of South-South and tripartite triangular cooperation. And then finally, an objective of the VNRs is, of course, to have an effective follow-up and review process. So not only do we embrace it, do we identify the gaps and progress where those exist, share experiences, but it is very important that we do so on a review and a follow-up basis continually. I'm happy to know that some countries have presented for as many as 3 times, and that's a good thing. And my fifth and final point is a preliminary point is that enhancing stakeholder capacity is really essential to this whole process because the stakeholders are an integral component of the shared responsibility that's written into the 2030 agenda, that it is government-led, but all stakeholders, it's a hands-on deck process with the involvement of all stakeholders. There are some key recommendations I want to leave you with, some points for consideration in terms of enhancing stakeholder capacity. First of all, increasing peer learning is essential. Stakeholders are not only to become involved in the process of designing implementation strategies, monitoring progress, and the review and the reporting exercises, but they should be part of a peer learning exercise, particularly through South-South and triangular cooperation. Secondly, I want to say that it is very important that we identify and customize best practices at the national level, but also interregionally and intra-regionally, but also and globally. These best practices may happen in developed countries, and some of them might be applicable to different contexts in developing countries, but they have to be adapted and customized as appropriate. And this is a process that can be done particularly through the vehicle of South-South and triangular cooperation. The benefit of sharing information and innovative tools, policies and strategies that are applied successfully elsewhere is also inherently built into the process of review and implementation. And so again, I identify a role for stakeholder engagement in this, both in identifying those innovative tools and policies and strategies, but also in helping to design how they can be best integrated into national policies and frameworks. My second to last point on this as we go forward is that stakeholders all suffer, they have resources, they have a lot of experience working at different levels, especially on the ground and helping to design and identify policy priorities, but they lack funding and they lack other types of capacity. So seed funding is very important. And in quite many instances, we're not talking about a lot of monies, but seed capital that can help stakeholders to be better positioned in bringing the value of their experience and knowledge to bear in the process. And finally, I want to also say that within the process of implementation, integration, review, and follow-up of the SDGs through the VNR processes, it is very important that we work closely with the UN system, particularly at the national and the regional levels. We have at the national level, of course, the UNRC system, the UN country teams, and we have at the regional level, my colleague is right to my right, representing a regional economic commission. We have them in all 5 regions. They're a very solid platform for substantive knowledge and policy analysis that governments and stakeholders can make use of. And we too, in the VNR process, will seek to now enhance the way in which we use these mechanisms to support governments and to support stakeholders in building their capacity. I will stop there and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for these very, very valuable observations and recommendations. I fully agree with them, especially in terms of the role of the UN entities in supporting that process. Very, very important. And it's a collective thing. I mean, from my experience from the field, it's a collective UN country teamwork, including the seed funding. Very, very valuable. And the role of the regional commissions, programs, entities is extremely also valuable because that also provide a lot of exchange of experiences. Before I move to our next speakers, I also wanted to mention that for our colleague from Uganda this year, and part of its belief in advancing the South-South cooperation, will be hosting the South Summit, I believe, in January. They will be also hosting the next conference for the LDCs and the LLDCs. So there's a lot that will be happening in Uganda. So anyway, our next speaker, Mr. Olivier Paddison, is the Chief Country with Special Needs Section at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP. And we're very happy to have you here, and he will be able to share with us also ESCAP's experiences in advancing South-South cooperation through the VNR twinning and utilization of the handbook, but also any other observation and insight are more than welcome. Floor is yours, Mr. Paddison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear participants, also all protocols observed. It's actually a newer name, countries with special situations. It used to be special needs, but that was a very awkward name. We felt special needs is not the right term, referring to LDCs, LLDCs and SIDS. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I'd like to thank the Office for South-South Cooperation for inviting ESCAP to this meeting. And I'd also like to congratulate the office for the launch of this handbook, and thank them for sharing, as we heard before, sharing this handbook with the regional commissions to seek our inputs and comments on this. We've already heard once or twice about the importance of peer learning. Neil just pointed out the importance of peer learning. You mentioned it before. This handbook features ESCAP's VNR twinning program, which I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper into my comments here today. You had mentioned the twinning between Georgia and Uzbekistan, which took on early in the process. And this twinning program has essentially been operational since 2020. We've had a number of countries involved in this. We twinned Philippines and Tuvalu 2-3 years ago. I think last year it was Sri Lanka and Pakistan that were being twinned. And this year also we expanded it to involve 3 countries, Tajikistan, Mongolia, and Uzbekistan. So we kind of select countries that do have some commonalities so that they can hopefully learn more from each other and there's more relevance. So this program aims to strengthen the preparations of the VNRs through peer learning by connecting countries that are preparing the VNRs in the same cycle. And of course, it strives to support the multi-stakeholder partnerships and cooperation that can enhance maybe this VNR process and reinforce leadership. I think we all know that the VNR process, of course, provides an important space to debate and to review policy changes that are needed, policy responses that might need to be adjusted. And I think by connecting and twinning stakeholders from different countries, you can actually bring more voices and groups to the table. And the experiences we've had is that countries have actually been quite frank to each other. They've been quite critical in the drafting of their processes, and there has certainly been a peer learning process. Essentially because countries, of course, want to discover practical solutions and to learn how other countries have maybe overcome some of the challenges that they faced. We've actually observed that there has been a keen interest in countries that have been joined through this twinning program to continue the partnerships often beyond this cycle. And I think that's an interesting part of the South-South cooperation, that it is demand driven. Through study tours, for instance, that were organized during COVID, we also shifted to virtual exchanges. And that, of course, makes it easier for countries to kind of connect to each other. And as I kind of mentioned, this does allow for a candid and also informal knowledge sharing. We selected countries that were either in the second or the third VNR process. Because in the first one, it was a learning process for countries. They were maybe, although it's voluntary, countries have been maybe timid. But in the second round, the second generation VNRs, there's certainly been, I think, some more candid knowledge sharing between countries. Maybe I can just highlight 3 or 4 lessons that we have learned through the cycle. I mean, for one, the twinning, of course, enables countries to explore innovative solutions and to develop expertise. I think number 2, the study tours have certainly facilitated knowledge exchange and have enabled them to learn from each other to kind of foster sustainable development. As a third lesson, of course, the peer review strengthens, I think, the VNR reports through the honest exchanges that I mentioned. And we've also tried at the HLPF to get partners that have twinned on stage at the same time and kind of present the VNRs in unison. And fourth, learning, I think, from regional peers and from regional stakeholders enhances the confidence ultimately of the stakeholders who are involved to maybe go back and also involve more stakeholders, learning what's been happening there. So maybe in conclusion, we are organizing a little bit of advertisement, a side event organized by the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade of the Republic of Tajikistan and the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Uzbekistan. There'll be a joint event next week where they'll be talking about the experiences that they had. And we're certainly keen to continue with this program in the next VNR cycle. We've already identified some countries. For instance, what one can also do, not only reviewing progress on the SDGs, but also linking it, for instance, to the graduation process. We have potentially 2 countries next year, Nepal and Laos. That might be, no, not Nepal and there was another one, LDC that might be preparing, no. Yeah. Anyhow, but linking it also to the other global processes that are relevant to these countries, the landlocked issue, the Vienna Program of Action, and the graduation process. So maybe linking it to these two. So those would be my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these insights and also sharing the lessons learned from the twinning program, the peer learning, the peer reviews, and I agree. I mean, the linkages with the global undertakings will be very, very important. So colleagues, with this, we do conclude our session today. I really want to take this opportunity to thank again all of those who have contributed and the friends of the VNRs, Morocco and the Philippines, really for the valuable inputs, the individual staff who have been behind it. Thank you very much for that. Morocco is represented with us today. Unfortunately, His Excellency was not able due to competing commitments, but we do also acknowledge their inputs to the process. Of course, all of those who have contributed to that, and thank you, Desa, thank you, ESCAP, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for all the member states who have contributed. I want to also open the floor if anyone has any pressing question for any of the presenters today, to give them this opportunity to also interact. Yes, we do have some hands up. Yes, please.
I noted in the report that there is a mention of South-South cooperation parliament to parliament. And I wondered whether there were plans to possibly expand that, because I know in the case, I'm Shazia Rafi, I head up Air Quality Asia. We are discussing with Honorable Lagarda from the Philippines, doing a model legislation workshop for the Asia region on the new PENCAS law and a few others that she has, brought into implementation in the Philippines. And I was also interested in finding out from the twinning that you mentioned of the Central Asian countries, whether you are targeting possibly specific SDGs related. I'm thinking of the ones related to clean air, which are, SDG 3.9, 11.6, and 12.4. So that might be a way also to carry it beyond just the VNRs. Thank you.
Let's take another question and then we can,
Thank you very much. My name is Charles Akol. I work with the UN Economic Commission for Africa. I want to associate myself with the comment that have been provided by our colleagues from DESA and UNSCAP, and to congratulate you, Madam Director, for this important handbook. I would like to think that if you allow me, we should pitch the handbook as a powerful tool for actually accelerating the implementation of those high impact initiatives that are being considered to be adopted at the SDG forum, at the SDG summit. So I think we should begin to develop that narrative very powerfully, because I think that the guideline, the handbook is coming at a very important time, and it's very timely. And then secondly, I think that we should also be able to link the handbook together with our VLR process, the voluntary local review processes, because for us in Africa, the VLRs are playing a very important role. And I'm happy to see the government of Uganda is represented here, because they were the pioneers in Africa in developing voluntary local reviews in Ngora district. So that is very powerful. And then also we would like to see how we can link it with our integrated planning and reporting tool that we have developed at ECA. Because I think the most important thing that we would like to achieve with these guidelines is actually countries leveraging South-South cooperation to undertake concrete activities. And there's no better way of doing it than what the director had said earlier on, making sure that it's mainstreamed in the planning process. I think for us now at ECA, together with the Office of South-South Cooperation, the most important thing is how do we take the guidelines forward? And I would like to invite the collaboration of South-South Cooperation to work with us, the regional commissions, in organizing regional workshops on VNRs to make sure that we advocate for the implementation of these guidelines. Because I think if we don't do that, we will be missing in terms of accountability, because initially we were consulted in the VNR, the development handbook, and we like to hear that is now a ready product and we can actually apply it. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions before we reply? I don't know whether with the colleagues online, is there anyone who is eager to ask anything? Okay, great. Maybe we'll start with you just quickly, and then I will pass it also to the colleagues to answer the questions. It's just, we hear you, and definitely the call for working closely with ECA in terms of training and capacity building is would be, you know, slotted as part of the activities. But also what's important, and we did that a few days ago, we also we're working to finalize, if you will, with DCO also the guidelines for integrating South-South in the planning at the national level, and that would be extremely important. And these two can also be, you know, linked together. So thank you for your comments. Let me pass it to Bushan to reply to the Parliament question that was raised, and then we can also pass it to ESCAP for that.
Yeah, on this thing in the parliamentary thing, this VNR whole VNR process is a very inclusive and participatory process, and that the engagement of the stakeholder is strongly highlighted this at all level. If we go through the UNDESA, the main VNR handbook, this handbook that we have prepared is that to complement that DESA handbook, while advancing the preparation and presentation of the handbook, how the South-South and triangular cooperation can be further integrated. So coming to back to the engagement of Parliament is that during the whole VNR process, the parliamentary and government authorities, NGO, civil society organizations, all are expected to be, and private sector, and to be engaged at all the stages of the process. So what we hear, what we say in this point is that engagement of Parliament is very essential, and that should be happening throughout the VNR process. And the handbook that we are developing is that the parliamentary had a very key role in advancing the South-South cooperation as well. Thank you. I stop here.
Shall we pass it to you for the, and maybe this I would like to add on the Parliament part, if, yeah.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I think there were two questions that you raised. One was on the selection of countries for the twinning. We don't base that on the specific SDGs because the VNRs, of course, review all of the SDGs. We base it more on what commonality do the countries have. I mean, of course, we have a very diverse region where we have developing but much more developed economies. But we do kind of need to twin countries that are similar and so that they can both get something out of it. In the case of Tajikistan and Mongolia and Uzbekistan, it was because of course shared history, being landlocked, they had kind of commonalities to address. I think in the next round, as I mentioned, it would, maybe be interesting. My view would be to maybe twin, for instance, Nepal and Bhutan and Laos, which I think are planning to present VNRs. They also share the landlocked issue. They share the least developed issue. So it's not on specific goals. But it's certainly something one can pick up. I mean, of course, there was the high-level forum on clean air in Mongolia in March, where that is a big issue. Regarding the IPU, I think Neil will be talking to that, sorry, the parliaments, but we've also in our region seen a strong, keen interest of parliaments. We in November, December, we presented to the People's Majlis of Maldives on the importance of twinning, on the importance of the SDGs. And we are at ESCAP also talking to the IPU to see how we can get them more involved, because there's certainly an important role, I think, that the parliaments can play in this. But you'll probably be able to share.
Indeed, especially for SDG budgeting.
Thank you very much. First, let me respond to the point that Bhushan made, that the handbook will definitely be part of the package of guidance that we offer to all governments, South, North, and everything in between, as they prepare for their VNRs. And so we already have a comprehensive set of instruments available and guidance notes. And now the handbook will be part of that. What we are also going to do is to update our guidance notes complemented by the handbook to include that reference to strengthening the role and the engagement of parliaments. It has been happening in many countries, but it's very uneven. In some countries, the parliaments are completely disconnected. And as you said, Director, it is very important that we involve parliaments, or that parliaments become involved, because they're not only important for budgetary purposes at the national level, but in terms of making legislation and embedding the SDGs into national policy and legal frameworks wherever that's possible. And so we'll be updating the guidance package that we provide to governments to make that point, to bring it out much stronger. And in our own engagement with governments and working with regional commissions, I'm very glad to see ECA present in the room as well. We'll be looking to scale up our support to governments in that regard.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just some additional comments. I'd like to join others in thanking our experts. My apologies for not mentioning it earlier, for your contributions, and to thank the lady for mentioning the Philippines and our Senator Loren Legarda, who's been active in interparliamentary contribution. I want to echo something which Ambassador Pierre mentioned about there is no one size fits all. There was mention of the Philippines being twinned with Tuvalu. Now, obviously, they're both island states and they have the problems of climate change. But again, we're quite different. I mean, I think the entire population of Tuvalu can fit in a neighborhood in Manila. I mean, we know, but the problem is the same. We're sinking. I mean, because of the climate change. So there are valuable things to be learned. I myself, as a foreign service officer for so many years, didn't know until recently, until some years ago, that South-South cooperation was really, really big, because I was still in that mentality of waiting for dole-outs from the North. In fact, if you look at the second committee resolutions here in the UN, it still follows sort of that line. And that's the value of emphasizing the importance of South-South partnership towards achieving the SDGs. And also I wanted to mention, there was alarm raised about how we're at the halfway point, and we're not going to meet the SDGs, but it does not mean that it's been a failure, because we had some lofty dreams. I would like to think that when they were set years ago, I think the world knew that reality was that it was going to be difficult to achieve them, and you could not predict things like COVID or countries invading another or so. But that's where South-South cooperation helps, because we help ourselves while not discrediting the continued important value of the industrialized countries, especially for triangular cooperation. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And thank you, sorry, everyone here with us in the room and online. I know that we do have an active list of participants who have been hearing this. This is an interesting discussion, and I would say to be continued, because at some point we have to see what is the impact of this handbook. Is it being used? Is it being integrated well? Is it being well? And it's also upon us to see if we need to improve on some of its aspects. So thank you very much, friends of the VNR, HLC President, our speakers, and the participants, and to the next one. Thank you.